Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Neurodiversity, How to Parent Through Understanding the Brain. I'm Georgia Weston. I'm the Executive Director of CHIP, Creative Healing for Youth in Pain. We're a nonprofit providing educational resources, exposure to creative healing experiences, and social support online. And CHIP is about more than just looking at the pain itself, but really broadening our understanding of health and wellness to include all kinds of overlapping issues. Physical and emotional pain, we know it tends to expand and lead into a snowball effect of sorts. So CHIP also helps families dealing with anxiety, depression, stress, and so many more diagnoses due to messages stuck in similar sticky neural loops. And we know the tools teens can use to unstick that loop and help change the messages going to and from their brains using creative activities and peer support. We have a great discussion lined up with your live Q&A questions. We would like to ask that everyone please keep themselves muted and cameras off so we can all enjoy without distractions. But you are able to type your questions into the Zoom chat throughout the discussion for our speakers to address. You can find that at the bottom of your screen. And now I am pleased to introduce CHIP's board member, Dana Pacholski, who will be moderating our conversation with our guest, Allison Burgess. Dana also serves on the board of the UCLA Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital, is co-chair of the Regenerative Medicine Institute campaign for Cedars-Sinai, the vice chair of Cedars-Sinai's Innovation Center project for the Board of Governors, and is a board member for the Clayton Children's Museum. Allison Lee Burgess, LMFT, is a licensed psychotherapist, professional speaker, and parent coach. She recently presented her TEDx talk, Reimagining Parenting, Transforming Expectations to Appreciation of Neurodiversity. For nearly a decade, she has specialized in working with highly sensitive, anxious, and spirited teens and their parents to help families stay emotionally connected through even the most intense times. Allison has helped hundreds of teens and their families and has done speaking engagements, presentations, and webinars to private, public, and charter schools. She has counseled members of the U.S. figure skating team and has had her writing contributions featured in Lambert academic book publications and published online articles for Divorce Magazine. Allison is a single working mom and proud parent of 3 fabulous teenagers. She has a private practice in the Pacific Palisades of California and also coaches clients virtually across the country. Now I will hand it over to Dana and Allison to get our discussion started.
Thank you, Georgia. Welcome, everybody. And thank you, Dr. Burgess, for joining us this morning. I think this is a really important topic. It covers a little bit of everything, but most importantly, how to parent to our unique children. So thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I think we should start with really defining what neurodiversity means and what are we dealing with our children's brain when it comes to behavior and pain signals, and we can dive right in from there, but it'll set a great platform for the rest of the discussion.
Yeah, neurodiversity it's becoming a better known term, but not a lot of people know what that means. They might have heard it here and there, but it's not something that's used commonly. So, most of the time, parents will describe their kids as anxious or or stressed. I think I used spirited, which is, kind of a euphemism for sometimes a really reactive teen. Sometimes you'll see a lot of rigidity in their behaviors, or they have to do things a certain way. So neurodiversity is really more of a concept looking at all of these brain functions as variations in a normal brain pattern and not as deficits, but just different versions of normal. So while one person may need to have, things just so and patterns or things that need to be really specific, other people don't. And it doesn't mean one's at a deficit and one's not. And I think in the past, sometimes some of these behaviors were looked at as problems. And certainly they can result in behavioral problems and things like that. I think as they relate to pain, what I see a lot of is that already rigid cognitive pattern, then you also have the emotional pieces that make it more difficult, especially for the caregivers. And usually I'm referring to the parents. Sometimes the parent has some neurodivergence and sometimes they don't. But what I often see therapeutically is kind of like relational issues that can exacerbate the problem and kind of reinforce these sticky neural loops that keep these people in chronic pain or chronic patterns of anxiety or chronic behaviors.
So in essence, we're talking about how everybody's brains work. And those that are particularly smart, as Dr. Zeltzer always says, it's the smart brain pain syndrome, right? Where one part is overactive and starts to repeat that pattern more and more until it becomes almost narrow. And that could be something we're talking about with neurodiverse, right? It's not a problem until they can't get out of the pattern.
Well, right. And it's like with any of us, right? So if you think about something as simple as a negative automatic thought that you might have about yourself, right? We all have them. And it's really hard to break that loop. You automatically think something, right? It's like, oh, every time I do this, like I must be stupid. I'm so stupid. Well, it's really hard to break that loop. It comes up so automatically that you may not even realize you're doing it. And then you might have a behavior that goes with that thought of like, oh, like, I can't believe I made a mistake. I'm so stupid. And to break out of that loop is really hard. And I think when you're adding pain into the mix and so many other bodily systems, it can be even harder to break that loop. So I think that's what makes working with pain even more difficult, because it's not just simply a thought that you can kind of just change. It encompasses all the systems, all the body systems.
And what you bring up right now is really important because pain and the way your brain work go hand in hand. So if you have a child whose brain works in a particular way, and maybe as a parent, we didn't notice that that was their brain's patterning. And
Right.
we've talked about this, right? I've had a child where I wanted to get them out of the car and we're right in Valet Park and they won't get out of the car and they look healthy. They've acted healthy and then they just refuse to get out of the car. And what do?
I mean, this is such a great story. And you've kind of talked about this before. So what you're talking about is both behavioral, emotional, and physical systems all working, right? And so as the caregiver, as the parent, you're simply looking at what appears to be a healthy child who is refusing to get out of the car, right? So, I always, as a parent myself of some, I have 3 teens, one of whom is neurodivergent, one has severe anxiety that shows up in some funky ways. And then I have one that's supposedly neurotypical, but has plenty of her own stuff going on. And so it's constantly trying to determine what is real either pain, real anxiety, real neurodiverse issue coming into play. And is any of it just they're being a teenager, they're being difficult, they're being, a lot of parents will say lazy or defiant or rude or, insensitive. So a lot of the work is kind of trying to parse through what's real and what's not. And when these behaviors become habitual, like some of them do with these neural loops, it makes it even harder, especially for parents to be like, wait, am I dealing with an issue or am I dealing with them just being a teenager? Right. So in your example was, just one of many, I'm sure, where you didn't know what to do in that moment. And you're like, just get out of the car. What are you doing? And, you can tell everyone kind of what happened next, that maybe your assumption was one thing. And then what did he say?
Well, I think it's really important for parents to look at what your child's doing, right? When they go sideways, are they going sideways for the obvious reason? Or is it a camouflage for a totally unrelated problem they've been storing down inside? For my son, it happened to be a physical ailment that we did not see. The pain was not obvious. So when he would be defiant or appearingly defiant, we would parent to the defiance as opposed to parenting to the unknown illness or his brain's processing.
Yeah.
And that's really why I wanted to do this lecture today, was because I really wanted to help everybody learn how to parent to your child's uniqueness, how they think and how they behave.
Yeah, I do. I think that's the number one question I get from parents is, we don't understand why they're acting this way. It doesn't make sense to your brain. And so sometimes it's, I'll ask parents to be like, well, let's consider for a moment that maybe their whole brain chemistry is a little different. So the concept of neurodiversity encompasses a lot of different kinds of, diagnoses. For example, autism falls under neurodiversity, OCD, ADHD, all kinds of learning differences, dysgraphia, dyslexia. All they mean is they process information in different ways than we do. So where I would do one thing and think it's very logical to proceed that way, someone with ADHD might not. And they need to do things in another way that makes them more comfortable, but we are really not seeing eye to eye. So sometimes when a parent has had a lot of conflict, and trust me, as you all know, there's plenty of conflict around chronic pain, which is invisible, just like all other mental health conditions. It can really cause people to almost, there can be a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of arguing. Obviously, that exacerbates everything, exacerbates the relational problems, exacerbates physical pain symptoms. So it's really imperative that the caregivers, the loved ones, the family members, teachers, other providers really understand exactly what's going on. And if we all understand, oh, well, the reason that your kid wouldn't, in your case, your child wouldn't get out of the car because he was in pain. But what if it was, I was overwhelmed by all the people standing outside the car and I could not get out. I couldn't move, right? So you're perceiving it as rude because for you, you just get out of the car. People are waiting for you to get out of the car. You're holding up the line, right? And for him, it's this internal process that he might be internally panicking, but you can't see it. And so the parent is like, get out of the car, get out of the car, get out of the car. And the child becomes more and more shut down, right? So you're seeing something that's made worse by the miscommunication. So my hope in talking to parents is to help them understand a little bit more about how their kid's brain works. If they have a kid with OCD, they might need to do things in a certain order, not to drive you crazy, but because it makes more sense to them and causes them to be calmer, which in turn will help with all of their other symptoms, right? So it's about having a better mutual understanding of what's going on and not, my kid has a problem where he won't get out of the car. He needs to be able to get out of the car, and that's my goal. Right? We have to look at it differently. And it's hard, sometimes, and I've talked to another colleague about this, I've called it backwards parenting for many years, because that's what it felt like for me, trying to understand why, I have 3 kids. Why is my parenting not working with them all? Why is it really not working with 1 or 2 of them? Right? And to be really scratching my head, like I'm doing all the things right. I'm doing all the things that people tell me to do, doctors tell me to do, books tell me to do, and my child isn't responding in the right way, or I'm not getting the compliance that I'm looking for. I don't understand why they're behaving this way. It doesn't make sense to me, right? And so now I know more, and I look back and think, if I had known that, that this was actually what was going on, I could have supported my kid in a totally different way and probably gotten what I wanted, which was maybe for the kid to get out of the car, for example, but I would have done it in a way that's not shaming my child or making them feel misunderstood or feel bad about themselves, which is only going to exacerbate any mental health issues that are going on.
Well, I think so often we parent from what we know, and we parent from our prior childhood too, and we forget to pause and parent to the child that's in front of us in their language and what their brain needs. And what you said was important too, because how are they thinking? And I remember thinking, well, if I could just get a diagnosis for my child, I could understand them. But sometimes you don't get the diagnosis, and sometimes when you do get a diagnosis, the label then narrows the playing field again. And so I think the most important thing we're going to impart in this conversation is, how do you parent with or without a diagnosis by just understanding how your children think?
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up. So this is a big deal. So getting a diagnosis is really important for certain things, right? And it's always great to have its information. However, from a psychotherapeutic standpoint, it only matters in terms of it can sort of guide treatment if I know there's something really, really specific happening. But I generally go by the person's lived experience. I have a kid right now who I could have sworn was autistic, and she got an assessment. It turns out she's ADHD with some other things going on. And it was, you see that overlap. But does my treatment with her change? No, because what she's reporting to me are things that may not have shown up on a report, or she's self-reporting that she feels autistic, for example, or so I always say I don't really mind if you have a diagnosis or not, because the modality is the same, and same for parents. If you notice there's some stuff going on with your kid, you can just consider, well, gosh, they seem a little anxious, or they seem a little I don't know, they have some quirky behaviors. Okay, so what would you do differently? Right? What would you do differently if your kid did have a formal diagnosis of ADHD? Right? How would you do things differently? So it's, I think it is really important to be like, whether you have traits of a diagnosis, or you have a formal diagnosis, or you're wondering about a diagnosis, the diagnosis at the end of the day doesn't do anything for you. It's the child in front of you still has whatever needs that they have, and more importantly, have a really, really deep need to be understood. I mentioned this in the TEDx talk, but the thing that I get when I see teenagers or young adults, almost without fail, they say, my parents just didn't get it, right? They just didn't get me. And that results in the depression and anxiety that are bringing them into therapy, for example. So the feeling of not being gotten is really, really common when you have a neurodivergent brain, because it's in the minority. So you're kind of living your life feeling like, people are always yelling at me, or like, I'm always getting in trouble, right? And like, and if there's pain added to the mix, then you've got all kinds of things going on. And if the people that are closest to you struggle to understand you or even believe you, imagine over time what that does to a person's psyche, right? We're talking over years. So the earlier we can intervene, simply with some understanding about, hey, let's all, kind of all of us, take a look at our kids differently and be like, are there anything, is there anything that I seem to be clashing on, or I'm having difficulty understanding? And can I be curious about those differences, as opposed to, well, I better diagnose it and fix it because there's a problem. And that's my job as a parent, is to fix them. Right. So it's a really new way of thinking, to kind of be like, oh, well, maybe they don't need fixing at all. We need to have understanding. Sometimes, yes, there can be accommodations that are necessary, right? Some of the neurodivergence can be, have some real disability. But I guess I caution parents, after kind of being there myself and rushing and wanting a diagnosis and wanting to explain why these behaviors were happening so they wouldn't happen anymore. It was like, well, you can get those, what I would consider difficult behaviors, we can get a better result by understanding those differences, and not as it's a problem that needs to be solved, or the kid needs to learn how to manage themselves so they don't react like that anymore. You're going to have a better chance of that if you kind of begin to think about, okay, so if their brain works totally differently, then it makes sense why they would do that. I wouldn't think that way, but I guess I get it now. If I had that brain and that made sense for me to do, then I get it. I get why they acted like that. Right. And then you can have a conversation about, okay, well, let's talk about that behavior. Wow, you got really, really upset. Let's talk about it.
And I think having a diagnosis is a roadmap to understanding your child's brain and how it works. It doesn't, and sometimes it requires accommodations in school, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the children don't even want to have the accommodation, which is an interesting piece of it. And I think it goes back to what you were saying, which is, don't try to fix me, but I think they want to be seen. And I think understanding and taking time to look at, how does the brain work? We rush to our doctor to understand why their bodies are in dysfunction from a physical way, but we forget how physical the brain is and how it's the control center for the whole body. So there's no surprise if the child's not being seen, heard, understood from basic parenting, right? If we're missing that our child likes orange and migrates to orange all the time, they're going to say, you don't see me. And then that's going to create anxiety. And then we're going to have this systemic autonomic response that creates all kinds of anxiety, even if they weren't predisposed to anxiety. So maybe you could talk to us a little bit more about that.
Oh gosh, I mean, you brought up a couple of really good things there. I'm trying to think of where to start. I mean, we talk about the sticky neural loop, and you mentioned something earlier about the smart brain, right? So, um, many of the, I mean, like most of these kids are pretty bright kids, right? And sometimes these brains make very fast assumptions. It's protective, evolutionary protective measure, right? So it's like, if I go to, let's say I need to go to my school campus, but I get panic attacks, let's say. And if I went to school one time and I had a panic attack, then my brain's going to make a very quick association with school, that school is bad, right? So school is going to cause a panic attack. Now, we all understand that you can kind of talk yourself into the panic attack. That's the loop, where if you drive by the school one day and maybe, you say, we need to stop on campus, that could initiate a panic attack. So I'll talk to clients about, like, your brain's actually really smart. Like, it's trying to protect you. It's going, oh, if that happened one time, then it must happen every time. So we're just going to like stop it in its tracks, and we're going to warn you by giving you that panic attack. So what we have to do then is, number one, recognize that it's happening, that you're in the loop, and you're like, right, I'm just sitting in my car outside of the school. There is no danger, right? Then you have to self-soothe. And this is something that we'll get into a little bit. Self-soothing is not just, I'm safe, I'm sitting in the car. It's a physical, how do I make my physical body that's beginning to panic? How do I get my physical body to come down a little bit, right? And then you can kind of evaluate and go, you know what? It actually isn't true. What my brain is trying to tell me right now is a lie. My brain is telling me I will have a panic attack if I go to school. But sitting here calmly, I can see that that's not even logical, right? There might be other possibilities if I go onto campus. I might have a panic attack, but there might be some other things too. So when you're in that calm state, you can problem solve. The piece that a lot of people miss is the physical response to the stress, right? Like they'll say, well, I get it. I'm fine now. It's fine. I get it. I'm in the car. It's no big deal. And I'm like, right, but I don't think your body gets it, because your body can't transition to calm and safety that quickly. So a lot of my work has been helping people figure out how to calm the neck down. I don't know if this is a very scientific metaphor, but I'm like, I almost picture it like, from the neck up is your wise mind. This is the one that's sitting here talking to me, that could kind of gets it and sees that, like, yeah, sometimes it's like, maybe it's even irrational, but that's just, I automatically do this. But from the neck down, it's almost like an amoeba, right? It's just sort of this, it's this sentient being. And if it's triggered or poked, it reacts. Right. So if it's poked by a thought or a surprise or something triggers it and it's going, then if you don't figure out a way to get the amoeba to kind of calm down and stop moving, you're not going to be relaxed. So what most people, and adults too, is they calm the thought, like, I'm safe, it's fine, get on with your day. And the body's still down here doing this. Right. And it's sort of like puttering around at this high level of stress. And then that just sort of sets you in that great place of, well, the next time something stressful happens, it's only going to be worse. So if you can teach people to go, okay, there's the neck up, which is, yes, I'm fine, here are all my thoughts. And the neck down is, oh my God, how do I let my physical body know that it's safe? Physical bodies do not understand language or reason. It's a physical thing. So that's a whole new, different way of working therapeutically, right? Because talk therapy is here. But what happens is, if you ignore this, then you're still panicked. You're still in panic mode. You need help with this piece. And people will say, yes, it's like my heart's racing and I'm sweating and like I'm shaking and I can't stop it and I don't know what to do. But my brain tells me, like, you're fine, like just let it go. So that can be really helpful in all of this stuff, in pain cycles, in anxiety cycles, to start to recognize, oh man, I've got a whole extra job to do besides just this.
Well, I think focusing on relaxing the body after the brain is really what these kids need. And these kids that end up in chronic pain, and you and I both are abundantly aware of this, what would you suggest for some of the parents that are here that they can do after they've had, and I would call it an excitatory moment, right? You push them to do something when they were worried and they may or may not have communicated they were stressed, right? Seemingly get out of the car. Why are you not getting out of the car? Or why did you not go to school today? And they don't want to tell us, but their body is already in this hyper sensitive overdrive protective mode, and their brain and their body are not connected. So what are a couple of things you might recommend for parents to do for their children? Is it something they can talk about? Is it something that they physically can do? Maybe some suggestions to help kind of reintegrate the brain and the body.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a great question, right? So you're asking, how can I help my kid calm down, right? Which is the biggie, right? Whether they're just reactive, whether they're having a panic attack, whether they're in a pain episode. I will always say, like, once the episode is happening, it's happening, right? So then you do what you can to get through the worst part of it and crest the wave of that. Sometimes if you try to intervene too soon, as all these parents can attest to, that will backfire tremendously. So you want to acknowledge the pain that they're in, or the anxiety state that they're in. In other words, you're matching their intensity. You guys, as parents, you might remember, like, parent training toddlers, like when your kids were little babies, they would say you meet them in their mood state. So if they're like really mad and they're throwing their toys, you would say, "You are so mad," right? Well, we want to translate that a little bit to sort of teenage and adult mirroring, right? Where you're like, "Oh my God, I can see this is really hard for you. Okay, I'm here," right? So you're kind of meeting them there. You're not trying to talk them down or soft talk them or tell them to take a breath. No, you kind of meet them in that intensity, and you're just very steady. Something that I say to some of the patients or clients that I work with, if they're in an episode and session, is kind of like, "Yeah, I see it. Oh man, I can really see it. Okay, you know what? I'm right here. I'm with you." And I just wait. And it might get a little worse. It might get a little better. And I'm just like, "Oh my God, it looks awful. I'm sitting right here with you. I got you. Like, I'm just here." Right. So I'm not, most people will say, and I've been, guilty of this a million times myself with my own kids, is you want to make them feel better. So we're trying to move them to feeling better. "Try this, honey, sit down, take some water, you take a breath, do this, do that." And really, there is nothing that can be done if they're too dysregulated, right? So what you want to do is be like, "I am right here. As bad as it is, I am right here with you. I am here." And when you see them kind of crest that wave, they come down, and, again, I wouldn't have like a big talk with them at that moment. If you're asking kind of physically, what can you do? If you've talked to the kid before, or you've practiced some of this before, you can do things like, "I can see that you're getting really upset. Do you want me to get that weighted blanket that Allison asked you to get? Would that help?" But you don't want to start throwing a bunch of things at them. You want them to kind of be like, I need that weighted blanket. Can you sit with me while I breathe? Remind me how to breathe. That's how you can kind of work with them. But the question, I guess, is twofold. I wouldn't spring something on a kid without discussing it first. Like, you're not going to throw a weighted blanket on somebody if they don't know what it is, for example. But if you are asking for tangible things and you've had these conversations, sometimes I'll say to the kids when they're calm, what do you think would be helpful? Like, if your mom was in the room or your dad was in the room, is there something that would be helpful for you or not helpful for you? Because I can help tell them, because they'll listen to me, right? So, like, what is helpful for you? Because what is helpful for one kid might be, "I want them to leave me alone. This is private. Like, I don't want them around. I just want them to get out." Another kid may be like, "Please don't leave me. I need them to be there. I want them to hug me. I want them to baby me. I want them to wrap me up." So, again, it's kind of when they're calm, talking to them like, "Hey, Dad and I really want to get better at this, because we really want to help you. And I know that when that pain or that episode or that panic is too big, there's nothing we can do but be there with you. But if there are some things that I could do that make it more tolerable or make you feel supported, what might those be?" Right. And then following it up with like, "Do we do anything that is really unhelpful? or like bothers you? Because I want to know that too. Right. So what's happening is not only are you getting some good strategies, but that kid is feeling really seen and understood. Right. Because most parents want to just come in and be like, calm down, come on, you're fine. It's okay. Come on, just take a breath. Okay, why don't you go sit outside? Like, you're fine. And then they don't understand why the kid gets worse. And then now they're fighting. And maybe that parent runs out of, walks out of the room like, I give up. I can't deal with that. I can't deal with you.
Well, I think really trying to meet them is the most important thing, and not try to fix the situation at hand.
It's
Really
torture. It's torture not to help your child. A child in pain or a child in distress, it's, everybody in this room understands that feeling, right? It's like, you hear your own crying baby and you have a visceral response to it. So that's where this idea of training, I'm segueing here a little bit, but, when I started having all these issues with my kids and really struggling to understand it, there wasn't really anything on the market. Neurodivergence wasn't a word. I didn't, I was doing all the things that I thought were the right things to do. And I realized that I had to relearn my parenting, which for a family therapist was very humbling. It was also a really great lesson, right? That I learned along the way from other really talented clinicians and providers to be like, no, you're doing it right, but you're doing it for a brain that's like yours. So you're doing it right. Your instincts are right, which is really important for everybody to hear. You're not messing them up or making it worse. It can look like that, but it's more that you just don't know what you don't know. So for me, I was like, okay, wait, so then I have to do this backwards thing, right? So for example, I have a kid who is on the spectrum, and I have to sort of, it takes a lot of patience, and it took a lot of work and a lot of training to think, if I want him to do this task with my other kids, I would say, do the task, right? Like, let's say it's something as simple as, he's a little older now. This is an older example, but if I was like, okay, we're leaving in 5, like, get your shoes on, and I'm yelling down the hall, that's good enough for my other 2 kids. But this one maybe wouldn't listen or wouldn't hear it, or would be in the middle of something else. And we'd get into these, these big kind of arguments. And it was like, I'm like, why can't you just get your shoes on? I gave you the warnings. I gave you a 5-minute and a 1-minute. And then I came in here and you haven't even looked at your shoes. Like, what's going on? You're being rude and disrespectful, blah, 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 on and on. Well, now I know, and have been taught, and now have practiced, that if my goal is to get out the door in 5 minutes, I got to do something different for that kid. So for that kid, I'd be better off taking a breath, going into his room, sitting down, observing what he's doing. Oh, you're in the middle of a game. What's this game? You talk a few minutes. He feels like you're kind of with him. You're like, you know what? We're going to need to be leaving in a few minutes. Let's begin to wrap it up. They're more likely to go, yeah, okay. And you can say, your shoes are right here. Do you want me to sit with you for these 5 minutes, or do you want me to leave? Right? You're going to have a better chance than if I just keep saying, I told you 3 times. Well, now I know with his brain, if he's locked into a game, he needs a lot of help to unglue from that and transition to another task. So I look at it as like, if I want to get out the door, then these are the steps that I need to take to make sure I get out the door without a huge fight. So it's this backward strategy, or I have to make it a value to him, for example. Like, if it's like, well, I want to get in the car because I don't want to be late to dinner, I have to think about why it would be a value for him, and then he will buy into it and go, as opposed to just, well, because I said so, we just need to get in the car. So all of these things are the things that you learn, time and time again, but having a deeper understanding of, oh, he's not doing this to make my life miserable. He is actually doing this because he literally can't do what I'm asking him to do, which is like, hey, remember in 5 minutes time to turn the game off and go get your shoes and tie them and put them on and come upstairs and like walk out the door. That's too many things for his brain. So now I know, right? So when all of you as parents are listening and thinking, gosh, I guess I could have reacted differently or responded differently to my kid, have I made this worse? Please don't ever shame yourself. You don't know what you don't know. And now that you try to learn a little more, and it's like, oh, well, my kid kind of acts like that, or my kid does this thing that she's talking about. Like, I guess I could consider maybe what's going on, right? And if I try something a little differently and it works and I get the kid out the door, then everybody wins.
And you're gonna spend the same amount of time either way, maybe less doing it, remembering how this particular child's needs were met.
Yeah, it's just exhausting. I say to all parents, if you're fully resourced, if you are rested and happy and you're not hungry and life is perfect and everything's great, then you can probably have the patience to do this. But most of us aren't that fully resourced at all times, which is why we need to practice, and we sometimes need to talk with a family therapist or somebody to be like, wait, what do I do? What do I do in this situation? They're being impossible. Like I don't remember what to do. My brain doesn't work like that. I can't do it. How do I help them calm down? Right. It just takes practice and understanding, and this kind of like exhausting patience that, is part of parenthood in general.
I'll never forget, a parent told me, I would tell my son, go upstairs, brush your teeth, you put your pajamas on, I'll be right up. And you'd go upstairs, and the child, of course, had done not even one of the three things. But as parents, we forget that our information we're giving them has so many steps in what we've told them to do. And if we're not paying attention to how our children process information, with or without special needs, diagnoses, or anything else, we all process information differently anyway. So we're going to talk to our children without paying attention to that. They're not going to put their pajamas on and brush their teeth, and we're going to be set up to be angry with our children for not doing what we told them to do.
I know another thing I experience quite a bit is when two parents or two caregivers or partners have different philosophies, right? And I see this a lot, especially when you're kind of in this education piece of like, okay, there might be something different about our kid, not different bad and need to be fixed, but different that like, I don't really understand it. So I'm trying to understand what this is. And I see quite often this, the two parents having really differing opinions on kind of what's going on, or what they want to have happen. Everybody understands the kind of, I call it kind of, old school parenting. It's like, because I said so, right? Like, or a 14-year-old should know how to get his socks on, right? So like, that's a problem, right? So I see that quite a bit, where, and maybe some of the parents here have experienced that too. It's like, well, what do I do if I'm, like you said, kind of parenting to the pain, or I'm parenting to the anxiety, and my partner is parenting to his expectations. And that's a really hard one. I'm sure that's come up in here quite a bit, is what do you do with that? Right. And how do you talk about that? And a lot of it is this education, and frankly, being able to see the benefit when you do start doing it this other way. Yeah, it takes a little more work. Yeah, you got to actually like try things and practice, which a lot of people are kind of unwilling to do. They're like, well, she just should be able to do this by now. This is ridiculous that she's still freaking out about this.
At her age.
At
their age.
Right. And so I'll say to them, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. At, whatever, at 16, she should not have to, throw things and cry. But let me explain why that's happening. Right, is the escalation got so high that she tipped over into, let's say, her neurodivergence, or it triggered her pain symptoms to fire, right? So now she has tipped over into this difference, and you can see it. Everybody knows what I'm talking about when they tip over into the kind of the real stuff, and you're like, oh crap, like this is like a big reaction, right? So if you're patient and you can try some things differently, you might have some good luck with that. If you are a little more closed off and frustrated, you might need a little help. You might need a little training and practice, and that's totally fine. You're not doing it wrong. We all have the same goal. I have parents ask me all the time, aren't we enabling them? Like, why are you babying them? Like, she needs to learn how to do this if she's going to go off to college. And I'm like, of course, you're absolutely right. She does, but she's not there, right? When she gets triggered, she is actually not 16, 17 years old. She's like 7. So we have to treat her like a 7-year-old in that moment. And then when she's calm, we talk about, oh my gosh, like what happened? You got really, really upset and you probably felt a little bit out of control. And let's talk about that. But I think that it's the expectations, right? It's like, well, when she's calm, she's perfectly capable of doing all this. So she should be able to do it when she's upset. And so again, it's like, yes, but she can't yet. So that's what we're working on, is getting her to be able to regulate her emotions and get her, like we were saying at the beginning, to, at first you have to even know that you're in it. That's a big piece, right? It's the very first piece. So if you have that 16 or 17-year-old and she was like, well, yeah, I got really, really mad. It's beginning to talk to her about, well, did you notice that you were starting to get madder? Because that would have been a great place to intervene, right? Or when you did get up really high, what did you do to try and come back down or not? What was helpful? What wasn't helpful? And then we can add to that with strategies and, things to calm the physical body, like we were talking about.
And I think parents often parent from a place of fear. If I don't do this, then they're going to, the pain's going to lock in, and we're going to miss more school. And if they miss more school, they're going to never get through high school. And I know personally, I can speak for a moment and say, if I can help anybody remember not to parent from a place of fear, you're a much better parent. And I'll leave it to you to tell us what that really means and how we can help our kids when we take our fear out of the equation.
It's so
Sorry.
hard. I know. It's really, really hard. I mean, we all have expectations for our kids, and some of them are conscious and some of them are unconscious. And, I find when I get either anxious or frustrated or angry, and because we all do that, we think about the next step. Well, oh my God, if they're acting like this now, then how are they ever going to launch? And like, right? Like, you can't be like this and da, da, da. You really have to just come back to the present and be like, well, what is? I learned in school years and years ago, it was a Zen koan, which is like a Buddhist poem. And it said, a still pond, a frog jumps in, plop. And I asked people, like, what do you think this means? What do you think this means? Well, the still pond is just you when you're feeling pretty calm, right? You're in your wise mind. You're just, everything's fine. A frog jumps in is something happening, anything, small, big, good, bad. Frog jumps in, the pond is probably rippling. Plop, what's that? Plop is the reaction. So most of us, the frog jumps in, something happens and we have a big reaction. Oh my God, can you believe this? Or, oh my God, my kid did this. And now I'm like freaking out and I'm so upset and da, 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 da. A Buddhist will kind of go in right there and they say, it is, right? It's like, all those things could happen. And here you are. You're still right here. You're still right here. So when you're done being anxious and worried and talking about the future and spinning out, you still got that kid right in front of you today. And to me, that can really help. Just be like, okay, I don't need to worry about the fact that they're still having reactions, or I'm worried about all these things in the future. Those are valid. But if I bring myself back to right now and be like, well, this is what I got to deal with right here in this moment. I can't think too far ahead. And that stresses me out, to think too far ahead. So you just deal with what's right in front of you and be like, she or he just isn't there today. And that's okay. They will get there with enough patience and time. It may not be on the timeline that we want. But, I always say it gets kind of beaten out of you over time. You tend to get a little more realistic expectations as time goes on. But it is looking what's right in front of you, right? It's the same child, whether they have a diagnosis or a treatment plan or a bunch of different providers working with them. At the end of the day, I always say I like for parents to be able to drop back into a parent role. That if you are fortunate enough to have support either from school or a therapist or a doctor, that your role is simply to love them, to be there for them, And to, like I was saying before, like just sitting there with you. Your job is not to fix and to change and to push and prod necessarily. So it's a big conversation because every human's different and every partnership is different. But yeah, I hope that answers that part of the question.
It does, and I'd like to take a few more minutes and to continue that road, because a couple things that came up while you were talking is one, if anybody's ever done equine therapy, it's one of the greatest lessons a parent can ever have, because the horse knows everything that you're feeling and it responds to you. So for us as parents to forget that our children wouldn't be similar. So if we come in the room and we've got to get them up and get them to school and we're going to be angry and we feel that pressure, they already know that. They're already going to lock in. And so I feel like this fear, taking the fear away from what you just said is having the parent step back in the parent role. If we can impart that on everybody to take that home with them today, and to remember what you also said, which is be now, be here now. You've got to get through the minute in front of you before you can even address the things you were worried about not happening if you didn't get through the minute in front of you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hate this old trope, but it is true. If the more that you learn, more that you as the parent can learn to manage your own anxiety about your child, the better the interactions are going to be, and I frankly always hated hearing that, because how are you not anxious as a parent of a kid that's struggling? But the more that you can kind of, whether that's going to your own therapy, whether that's talking with a friend, whether that's, doing whatever you can to resource yourself as much as possible to be like, I really am doing everything I can. I'm doing the best I can today. Right. And if at the end of the day, if I just close the book and say, I couldn't fix my child today, but I helped my child feel understood, and that I'm with her and just sitting there with her or him, even if they're in pain, even if they're stressed, that I'm just there with you. Right. I can't fix it for you, but I'm here with you, is going to go so much farther than any intervention or treatment strategy. It's the emotional connection. And I always tell parents, I see it on the back end. If you do that work, generally they're not showing up in my office as young adults with severe depression or anxiety, right? And feeling alone and misunderstood. It's like, no, my parents really got me, and I feel solid as a person. That's much more important than anything else, or pushing them toward a therapeutic goal. Right. So that's kind of like, if all else fails and everything is sideways, it's like, just drop down to the basics. So it's, equine therapy is a little like that too. It's like, all right, this day was awful, so I am just going to drop down to the basics and just relate to my kid. I'm going to forget all of the goals. Right. Because that, if you have that emotional connection, you can build on that. I think I learned from an equine therapist, you can't have compliance without connection. And so a lot of parents are like, well, because I said so, or just do it because I'm the parent, or like, I asked you, so do it. And you can parent out of fear, which is kind of old school parenting, or you can parent out of connection. Like, hey, listen, I'm going to ask you to come to dinner. And I know it's a lot because I know you don't like crowds, or you might not be feeling very well, but I'm going to explain to you like why it's important to me. And would you be able to come? Is there anything I could do to make it okay for you to come, knowing that you're going to be in pain, for example, right? It's going to get you a heck of a lot farther than, listen, we need to go to dinner and you just need to get ready. We're going to be leaving in an hour and I don't want to hear about it. Like, that this is a family dinner that we're all going to go to. Right. So that's, in the simplest terms, it's like you're doing everything right. If you can connect with them and they feel understood, bravo, your parenting job is done.
And I think one of the greatest ways we can achieve that is by trying not to fix them every time they're going sideways, by just being there. And I think that's something that I'll keep reiterating, because I know firsthand that's so important for them to feel seen and heard. There's a question that's come up that is one that I can kind of put in two different ways. So somebody's asking about how you get your child with executive dysfunction to do something that they perceive as challenging. It can be anything: cleaning your room, homework, going to school, showering, anything. What would you recommend for that? And I think we could take it to another place, which is if your child has pain right? So in this particular parent's question, they're asking about executive functioning, but I'd also say we could answer the question from two sides. If you know your child doesn't want to do it because they think they're in too much pain to do it, and if they just might struggle because they have executive dysfunction.
The eternal question. Yeah. How do you get somebody to do a non-preferred task? Some of us will do it begrudgingly, and we complain and we bitch and moan and we'll do it, but whatever. Other people, a lot of neurodivergent people, for the record, tend to really dig their heels in. And it's very hard to get somebody like that to do something they don't want to do or they don't see a value in doing. It's very challenging. This is where that concept of kind of backwards parenting can come in. So, I'm sure all of the parents and the parent asking that question has had that dread of like, I have to ask them to take a shower, or I have to ask them to like go to school, or something that they really don't like doing. And you're like, oh God, I'm dreading where this is going to go. So again, if you can think about it, like, what's the value to my child, right? If they don't really care about hygiene, they're not ever going to want to get in the shower. And the rationale that you and I would use with our potentially neurotypical brain, for example, would say, well, I also realize that I will smell bad if I don't take a shower. And so that's something that I'm going to go ahead and do, even though I don't really want to right now, I'm going to do that. But for somebody who has a very rigid thought pattern, it's like, well, I don't care if I smell. I really don't. So you're the one with the problem. I don't want to take a shower. So then you're left with like, oh my God, well, how do I do this? So again, you have to kind of come around, like kind of say, listen, that taking a shower is like part of the thing. So would you like to take it? Like, do you want to take it before dinner or after dinner? You kind of, it's that kind of choice thing, or you make it something like, if you can get your shower done, then we can go do this thing that you were talking about. Right. So you make it a value. It's not like, well, we just take showers. We don't want you to be the smelly kid or whatever. It's like, no, I have to make it a value to him. Or if I can't make it a value, just to be like, look, this is something that is important and I'm not going to move on that, but I can help you. I get it. I get that it like sucks and you really don't want to do it. And how can I make it easy enough for you that it's just quick and done. Right? Either a reward afterwards or just kind of being there with them like, oh, I know it's really not important to you. It's really important to me. And something that I really, really think we need to have is that you take a shower and keep your body clean. Right.
As you were talking, I was thinking about how important it is for parents to realize that conversation is a teaching moment. They may not think about that as a teaching moment, but if they're getting their child to think, well, wow, I just didn't want to take a shower, I don't care. But you're approaching them in their way, right? If we're going to just say, we got to take a shower, they're not going to take a shower. I mean, we've heard stories about boys I can't even tell you how many kids I've heard, and I'm not in your business, about boys that would never shower and then woke up one day and were like, I can't leave without showering. But if I had fought, what would happen? The parents will say, they still wouldn't have taken the shower. So having that conversation may be more important than whether or not that child took the shower that day. It might be setting the stage for them to be able to do it later by being heard.
Right. And you're right. There are going to be times where you will, there will be a dig in, and I think you had asked a little bit about pain too. I'm trying to think of how that would work in terms of, are you talking about a pain episode or a child complaining of pain?
Well, I think for the kids with chronic pain, one of the challenges for parents is that, well, they're in pain, so I can't push them, right? Or the other side, I mean, sometimes there's usually a parent that thinks their kid is in more pain than they are, or in more pain than the other parent. So there's that piece of it, which you can come to that in a minute. But I think it's about whether or not we're parenting from, well, I don't want to push them because they're in pain, or if I push them, they're going to be in pain. And then there's something, and the flip side, the child that says, I'm in pain and I can't do it. What would you recommend?
Okay, so this is what I always recommend for this, is you just climb in the boat with them, right? It's a strategy. Do you think they're in pain? I don't know. Are they in pain? Who knows? Probably, maybe, I don't know. But you need to climb in the pain boat with them, right? Because remember, we talked about just kind of meeting them where they are. It doesn't have to be that you're going to get as agitated as they are, but you're you're basically saying, oh my God, I see that this is really happening. Like, and again, like not getting flustered, but just like, you know what, I'm just gonna be with you while this is happening. And then excuse me, as far as pushing, it's a delicate, excuse me, it's a delicate question. It is the number one question I get is do we push, is this real? Is this not real? I think, again, if you have a connection with them and you are able to kind of be like, I see it happening right now. I'm just going to sit here with you a little bit. Like, we're just going to sit here and then we'll try it in a minute, right? At the end of the day, you might have to pack up and go home, so to speak, right? You can't force. It's just like the equine therapy thing. If we had more time, I'd tell you some stories about that. But if you try and push and you push too soon, they will push back, right? It might exacerbate that pain episode. It might make them angry or upset. It might just escalate. So a couple of things. So yes, get in the boat with them. And then what was the question? So if they're in, I'm sorry, what was the question?
Well, there's the two sides, right?
Right.
You're parenting from a place of your parent fear, well, they're in pain, versus the child saying, I'm in pain, why are you pushing me?
Right.
Or fear of pain as a whole.
You mean the parent's fear of the pain or the child?
I think it's both, right? The kid, when do you parent to a child that's saying they're in pain and pushing versus the parent parenting from their perception of it's going to push them into more pain?
This is one thing that's really interesting that you can think about kind of conceptually. So if a kid's in chronic pain, then that means they're in pain a lot of the time. Sometimes it's episodic, sometimes it's sort of a low grade pain. So what we want to do as parents, especially, you're not doctors, you can't make the pain stop in the moment necessarily. And God forbid you try to talk a kid out of their pain, right? That's not going to go anywhere. Is to kind of say, I see that you're in pain. And I get it. We're right here. And then also, do you want, how did I phrase it? I phrased it with a client kind of lovingly ignoring, right? Where it's sort of like, I see that you're in pain and we're also going to go ahead and start the movie. Like, I'm right here. I'm just going to sit with you, but we're going to go ahead and start the movie or whatever the family's doing. That we're not going to stop everything and have this whole massive thing. We're not going to stop necessarily the activity or the thing that we're trying to get them to do. Be like, oh no, I can see that this is really happening. Okay, I'm right here. And yep, we're in the car. I'll just sit with you in the car for a minute, but we're still driving. So the idea eventually of like, can you hold both at the same time? Can you be in a certain amount of pain and I'm knowing that I'm here with you, and yet we're still going to do the activity because we want to increase their ability to do both. Right? It doesn't have to be pain-free for you to do the task. Can you do them while you're in pain a little bit? And I'm here supporting you. And yet I want you to do the things that you want to do. Right? Sometimes it's things you don't want to do too. But if it's, if I had a specific example, it might be a little easier, but that would be the idea, is to help them kind of accept a certain level of pain and really acknowledge and validate that that's happening, even though you can't see it. And then also say like, and I am going to go ahead and I'm going to step into the kitchen to start making dinner. I know that you're in pain, so I'm right here, but I'm just going to continue with my activity, for example.
No, I think this was really helpful. And we talked so much that we got through so much, believe it or not. It is 10:58. So I always appreciate everybody's time, and I don't want to keep any over. I think, but to wrap up the one thing you just said and to close it, was one thing I learned in the 21-day pain program is that the kids don't get worse. The kids with the pain, when they're pushed to do full activities all day in a very safe, structured, I hear you, I see you environment, don't get more sick and don't have more pain. So I can leave that for everybody to think about. And I can thank you so much, Dr. Burgess. You and I could have talked all day, so maybe we'll have the opportunity to come back and do this again and get some more questions. But thank you so much for your time. And thank you to everybody who joined us. And Georgia, I'll toss it back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Allison and Dana, for that great discussion. And thank you to our audience for joining us today and sharing your questions. We are wrapping up this webinar, Neurodiversity, How to Parent Through Understanding the Brain. We will be sending out the recording of this over email to registered audience members in the next week or so. So just keep an eye out for that in your inbox. And feel free to contact us with any questions. Please follow CHIP on social media. We have a Facebook, a Twitter, an and Instagram and the YouTube channel. You can also check out our website by visiting mychip.org. And on our YouTube channel, we also have the previous webinars too, if you want to watch back at ones we've done in the past. So thank you again, Allison and Dana, for taking the time to speak with us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you again. And thank you, Dr. Zeltzer, for bringing us all together in this really safe environment for us to talk about really important things. So thank you.